All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the On-Farm Dairy Processing webinar. It's 6 p.m. on my time, and so we are going to get started. First of all, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Camila Lage, and I'm the Dairy Management Specialist for the Southwest New York Dairy, Livestock, and Food Crops Program. The Southwest New York Dairy, Livestock, and Food Crops Program is a Cornell Cooperative Extension partnership between Cornell University and the CCE associations for Allegheny, Cattaraugus, Chautauqua, Erie, and Steuben County. And before we get started, I just wanted to share a little housekeeping for this program. So this webinar is being recorded, and we are using the webinar feature, so everyone is muted. So please, if you want to ask any questions or keep the questions for our speakers, you can use the Q&A box in the bottom of your Zoom meeting. And these questions will be answered in the end of the program. And you can also interact in the Q&A box with other people's questions. So if someone asks a question that you are also interested in get answered, you can thumbs up the question, and in that way we will know which questions have a high interest in being answered, and we are going to prioritize it in the end. And we are going to have two speakers today, and we are going to have all the questions answered in the end of the program. We are also going to have a survey by the end of the program that we really would appreciate if you guys answer, because it would take you 5 or less minutes to take it, and it really helps us improve our program. Your feedback is very valuable to us. So going forward with that, I just want to introduce our speakers today. So we are going to have two speakers, and the first one will be Katelyn Walley-Stoll. Katelyn is the Farm Business Management Specialist and Team Leader for the Southwest New York team. And after Katelyn speaks, we are going to have Anika Gianforte, who is going to talk also today. And Anika is a dairy processing and marketing specialist with Cornell University. And with that, Katelyn, if you want to share your screen, and the stage is yours.
Great, thank you. Camila, could you let me know if that came through okay? Okay, perfect. All right, so I'm going to start out with just a couple of acknowledgements that I do want to make. And we're really grateful to have all of you here. This has been a topic of interest, especially with the pandemic and demand for locally produced food. And we've been hearing from more and more farms that are looking for more information on this topic. So we're really glad that you were able to join us. I know it's probably pretty close to almost the worst time of the year to do something like this. So we're grateful to have you here. I should add too, if you have any questions about this topic, we'll provide all of the contact information for our program, and we can help get you resources and assistance after this series as well. So our program, the Southwest New York Dairy, Livestock, and Field Crops team, is a partnership between Cornell University and the 5 CCE associations of Allegheny, Cattaraugus, Chautauqua, Erie, and Steuben County. We're one of a dozen regional teams all across the state. And if you want some more information about our program, that's our website that will have all of our team members' contact information. We also want to mention that funding for this work is provided in part by an award from the Northeast Risk Management Program and the USDA National Institute of Food and Agriculture as part of a statewide effort to provide educational resources for dairy farmers who are looking to diversify their farm business to improve risk management. And then finally, we really want to thank the experts here. So Anika, Robert, and Kim, who you'll hear from all 3 of these folks over the next 3 weeks. We're really grateful for them sharing their time and their expertise, and as well as acknowledging the entire Dairy Foods Extension team at Cornell. So Anika will be sharing more about their program later on tonight. just an overview of the series and kind of what the expectations are for this 3-part series. Target audience is definitely dairy producers who want to diversify or vertically integrate their business. So this isn't designed necessarily for homesteaders or small scale production. This is truly a commercial operation for your farm business. And also, we know we've got some service providers here too. So if you're from Extension or some other type of support agency, we hope that you'll find this information helpful in your work. As Camila mentioned, we're recording this and sharing it with everyone who's registered, and we'll be sharing it out beyond this series as well. If you have questions, feel free to use the chat or the Q&A box. It's sometimes hard for us while we're presenting to catch those questions as we come in. So we'll try to answer them if we see them. And if not, once we get to the end, we'll make sure we go through all of the questions that have come through. And then just one more shameless plug. If you fill out that follow-up survey tonight and you have suggestions for topics or changes that you'd like to see for our 2 and 3 sessions, we will try as hard as we can to incorporate those. So please feel free to use that survey. It really only makes the whole program better. And then tonight's topics, we're going to be talking about fitting on-farm dairy processing into your farm business to hopefully improve profitability. And what does that mean? Next week, the topic will be considerations for designing your processing facility for quality production. And we'll wrap up the series with everybody's favorite topic, red tape, and how to manage that for efficient and sustainable value-added dairy production. So with that, we want to know a little bit more about who is here in the room tonight. So we've got a poll question, and it should have popped up on your screen. Mostly, we just want to know what kind of stage you're at. So are you a dairy farmer that's already doing value-added dairy? Are you a dairy farmer who isn't processing yet but's interested in it? Are you a farmer who doesn't have milking animals but you're looking to get started? Are you a service provider, or do you just really like ice cream and cheese and yogurt and milk and had nothing better to do on this lovely sunny Wednesday evening? So we'll leave this up here for a few seconds just to kind of get a better handle on who's in the room right now. Okay, I'll give everybody about 10 more seconds and then we'll close the poll out. All right. So it looks like we do have a small amount of people that are already doing some type of value-added production. Majority of folks are dairy farmers that aren't processing products right now. We've also got a good chunk of service providers and a good chunk of people that just really appreciate dairy products. So welcome, you're our people. We're glad you're here. All right, thank you, everybody. All right, so now I'm going to talk about nobody's favorite subject, which is paperwork and risk management. We put me first and then Anika last, so you guys will be excited for Anika's presentation because you can only go up from here in terms of excitement. When we think about value-added dairy processing or any type of farming, really, there's tons of risk involved, and I don't need to tell any of you that. But what we look at when we talk about risk management on farms are kind of 5 big buckets of areas of risk. So the first one is production risk. These are things on the farm that affect outcome or yields. For value-added dairy processing specifically, this would be looking at the quality of the milk that we're producing and the quality of the products that we're hopefully selling with this new venture. The next area of risk is human. Human risk management is anything to do with people, and humans are really, really great, but they're also kind of the worst. So they cause tons of accidents, tons of risk involved whenever we're working with people. And these can be people on our farm management team, customers that we're selling to, other people in the general public, employees. And we want to make sure that what we're doing on our farm preserves their health and well-being. The next area of risk is marketing risk. So these are things that affect the price that you receive or the price that you pay for any types of inputs. When we're talking about value-added products, this looks like what's your access to markets? Are there any types of government action, regulations, rules that you need to follow that will affect your marketing practices? And a big one that we're talking about today is inflation. So how does inflation, both for products that we're buying and products that we're selling, affect our business, and how do we manage that risk? The next area of risk is legal risk. So this includes contracts. If you're looking at putting some type of a contract in place for wholesale sales, business structure, laws and regulations, liability is a huge one. How are you going to manage the liability? There's already liability concerns in commercial dairy production, but once we add value-added production on top of it, it just exponentially expands the risk and how we need to manage that. And then there's financial risk. So these are areas of risk that can affect your farm's financial health. Things like cost of products, availability of capital, cash flow, how you're going to maintain and grow your equity over time, and how are you going to absorb short-term financial shocks. So these are kind of the 5 big areas of risk. We mention them because we want you to have these in the back of your head. So everybody comes to value-added dairy processing with hopes and dreams and excitement. And we don't want to entirely crush those hopes and dreams, but we do want to give you a heavy dose of reality that there's a lot of risk involved once you take this step. And we've got one more poll, which is out of those 5 areas of risk on the farm, which one do you think matters the most when we talk about value-added processing? I'll leave this up here for about 30 seconds. So out of these 5 areas, legal, production, human, marketing, and financial, which one from your perspective matters the most? I'm seeing these responses as they're coming in, and I cannot wait to share them. So thank you all for indulging me. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and share these results. The answer is that it's a trick question because all of these matter a whole bunch, but it's really interesting to see how people are thinking about this. So we've got kind of a mix, and the one that nobody thought was the biggest issue is human risk management. And humans are the worst. So from my perspective, that's what I consider as the biggest risk when we're doing value added. So thank you all for sharing. There's no right answer because they all matter equally as much from our perspective. And again, as we go through the rest of this presentation, keep these in the back of your head and ask yourself, how am I going to manage these different areas of risk? So if this is such a risky venture to consider, it's really important to also think about why it would even be worth going down this path of processing your own products on your farm. So essentially asking that why bother question. Why did you sign up for this webinar? Why do you think that this would be a good fit for your farm? So for those of you who feel comfortable doing so, if you want to jot down in the chat box, you can use the chat box and tell us why you're bothering to learn more about this topic tonight. So how would on-farm processing help your farm? What's your why bother when it comes to diversifying your farm? Why do you think this would be a good fit for you? And we'll give everybody just shy of a minute to drop those in here, and I'll add it in the chat box too. And this is for us to kind of see where folks are coming from and have a conversation about the role of value-added processing on our dairy farms. And if everybody's doesn't want to participate too, I've got some stock answers that we can pull up. So we've got dairy goat producer that would like to sell products. Thank you for sharing that. Someone who works off the farm full-time, and by adding this venture, it would hopefully let them come home onto the farm and work on the farm full-time. It's a really great why bother. So while folks are adding in more, I will kind of pull up some other ideas too. We've got for agritourism and more product offerings. That's great. With commercial dairy, it's really hard to share your story, right? And having some type of product to sell or opportunity for people to come onto the farm is always great. Some other ideas that I hear of is to control your milk price. So milk prices are really volatile, and to an extent, with selling your own products, you can set your own price. Since there's more work involved with value-added processing, potentially there's higher profit margins. Someone also added in the chat, it feels like there's so much to do already, it would be more work, and that's an extremely valid point and something that we'll talk about too. Increase in product value, which we kind of talked about. From a risk management standpoint, the more that you can sustainably diversify the products that you're offering, so kind of that idea of putting all of your eggs in one basket, the more you can reduce your product risk. Opens up new markets. So instead of selling just to a co-op, for example, you can sell directly to consumers or stores. You really like ice cream, so that's always a good motivator. I'm also hearing more about people who are interested in community food access. So by being able to offer a high quality product to their neighbors, they're also able to tell their story and share with their neighbors a little bit more closely what they're doing. I'm hearing a lot too from farmers that are from dairies that might be smaller and might have difficulties with meeting minimum pickups, have space issues, want to stay at a small herd size, and that economies of scale kind of works against them with our current dairy market. Value-added processing can sometimes be an option to stay that size. Growing your business is also one that we hear about too. So briefly, I'm going to talk about 7 kind of considerations to think about with how on-farm processing fits into your farm's business plan overall. These are briefly because this is a whole week-long process, but we do want to introduce these kind of consideration and questions for you to think about as we go through the rest of the series. So the first one that I think about is your management team support. So thinking of the people that you work with on the farm and how incorporating value-added products would affect those relationships that can sometimes be positive, can sometimes be negative. How does this change support them? How does it support you? And most importantly, is everyone on your farm management team on board? So sometimes we see, one part of the farm management team is very aggressive and is very excited about this, and some other folks might be more hesitant, and it's hard to make this work if everybody's not on board with the plan. And a shameless plug that when you're going through this business planning process, some key advisors that you could loop in to have a third party help you out with a business plan would be CCE specialists across the state like myself. New York FarmNet is always a really great resource. And we're also seeing farms work with their local SBDC because they've got some unique product marketing ideas, and how does that fit into your business plan. The second consideration to think about is where you're at on the business life cycle. So in general, businesses follow this life cycle of a launch and startup period, a period of growth, a period of maturity, and usually peak profitability, and then a period of exiting the business. So over time, businesses will go through this, and there can be some movement forward and some movement backward. But if you are, for example, just starting your farm business, how does adding in value-added processing affect your goals? And on the other end of the spectrum, if you're working on retirement or exiting the farm business or transitioning the business to the next generation, how does this affect those transition plans or those exit plans? Is a good question to consider. The next thing that we look at is your farm's financial position and your potential borrowing capacity. So Are you profitable right now? If you're profitable doing what you're doing, then why add something else? And alternatively, if you're profitable, does this help you continue to grow your farm business? What's your current farm debt load and how much more can you sustain? So as a surprise to no one, all of this costs a lot of money to do, and knowing how that's going to affect your farm's overall debt position is really important. And how are you going to fund it? So do you have reserves on hand? Are you able to go get a loan? Do you have funders that you can work with? Knowing where that money comes from and how it affects the financial health of your business is important. And then finally, how would the borrowing capacity of the farm adjust and change if you added this venture? So if you borrowed money for this, what does that look like 10 years down the road? Are you going to be able to pay that loan off? Are you going to be able to borrow for anything else? And how does that affect your overall capacity to borrow in the future? Then we should look at cash flow budgeting and profit potential. So for most dairy producers, you're used to getting a milk check in the mail twice a month. Even if it's not a great milk check, it's going to be there and it shows up in your mailbox. When you're selling products through different avenues, that cash flow can look different. It can be seasonal, it can be sporadic, and you have to be able to budget and manage your finances to adjust to a different type of cash flow. Then we should also consider startup costs and how that's going to affect your liquidity. So if you tie up all of your money and your reserves into getting this venture off the ground, what does that look like if you have an emergency happen? How are you going to respond to that? And most importantly, from my very humble perspective, is do you have a budget? So it can be really exciting to jump right into this process. But if you don't have a budget or an idea of what the financials will look like or what you need to do to make the venture profitable, it decreases your likelihood of success if you don't have that financial budget in place. And then how long will it take you to turn a profit? And you'll see as we move along too, it depends on where you're starting and what your goals are moving forward. So the last three is that I want to cover very quickly: calculating your cost of production, which kind of goes back to good record keeping. As you start producing product, how are you going to track how much money it's costing you to produce that product, so that then when you go to sell the product, you know you're not losing money every time you sell something. So if you don't know what your costs are to produce something, you have no way of guaranteeing that what you're selling it for is going to earn you a profit. And then have you thought about creating an enterprise budget? And the answer is probably no right now, which is why you're here, and we're glad that you're here. And if you decide to move forward with this, creating an enterprise budget specifically for value-added production is important to make sure that you're at least headed towards profitability and have a plan to get there. Then we look at opportunity costs. So this takes a lot of time and a lot of money to start up. And if you applied that time and money to someplace else on your farm or to a different venture, how would that affect your farm's profitability? And then finally, this one's a little bit touchy-feely, but it's good. So how does this new venture affect your well-being? So does this project create a better or a worse quality of life for you and your family? How are you going to handle the stress of a new venture when things go wrong, but also when things go right? So sometimes success can be overwhelming as well. And how do you have support systems in place to manage that stress? And then finally, thinking about what contribution this venture adds to your overall farm business goals. And if it's going to get you to where you want to go, then great, let's figure out how this works. If you're jumping on this bandwagon because you think it's going to be the next big thing, then it's going to be a little bit more difficult to justify its place in your overall farm business plan. So now we are going to transition to some less boring, less paperworky stuff, but still a little bit of paperwork because it's really, really important. So we do have one question, which is to ask, do you like paperwork and business planning? So we've got a variety of answers here, which include love it, yes, no, nope, and my favorite, which is I like getting hit in the eye with a tail at 4 a.m. more than paperwork and business planning. So we'll leave this up here for a second. And Anika, while we're doing this, you can, I think I stopped sharing, so you could go ahead and load up your slides.
Yep, they should be loaded.
It's coming through on my side. Thanks.
Thank you.
So I'll end this poll and then we'll transition it over to Anika. Nobody loves paperwork and business planning, which is always a surprise to me, but we've got definitely got some mixed feelings. So you guys are all in good company. All right.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Katelyn. So that teased me up really nicely because Katelyn covered a lot of things that sound very ideal, but when we get into practice and interaction with folks who want to do value-added dairy ventures, those were all great points that we see in all of our interactions with folks who are pursuing this line of work. So I'm going to start out by just quickly introducing myself and covering what my team at Cornell does. So my name is Anika Gianforte. I'm a dairy processing specialist with Cornell Dairy Foods Extension. And a lot of people might not be aware that we have a whole dairy foods extension team that's based on campus in Ithaca. And we cover the whole state in one way or another. So my team tends to drive around a lot. And we, people are usually familiar with, especially a more farming oriented audience is familiar with the fact that we have a lot of cooperative extension resources for farm level resources, whether it be on a dairy side or agriculture in general. But my team focuses specifically on value added dairy production. And we do focus a little bit on the raw milk quality side of things because it, of course, impacts finished product quality and finished product food safety. But that's just a little bit of background on the fact that we do have a Cornell Dairy Foods Extension team. So just really quickly, this is me. We're all masked up here. We also have Rob Rallier. He's on the line today. Rob and Kim may jump in if they feel the need, and please go ahead if you would like to. Rob is a microbiologist on our team. He'll be speaking next week in this series. And he also helps run our food processing development laboratory on campus. So we have a pilot plant that can be utilized for folks who are interested in trialing product. It's used by small companies, big companies, you name it. So he has great food processing expertise. This is Alex Sola. He helps us with some coordination, and he also runs the New York State Cheesemakers Association as their executive secretary. We have Mackenzie Brown, who helps Rob in the food processing development lab. This is Dr. Sam Elkane. Sam is a fermentations expert. So he focuses specifically on, of course, dairy-based fermentations. So lots of exciting things happening in that area, great resource. The leader of our team is Dr. Martin Weidman. Martin is a microbiologist and a veterinarian by training. And his expertise is in foodborne pathogens like Listeria monocytogenes. So that's something that no one wants to have entering their business whatsoever, but definitely an important and relevant resource. Louise Felker is our program coordinator, so she helps pull us all together. And Kimberly Bukowski, who is also on the line, she will be speaking in the final series of this webinar, so in 2 weeks. And her expertise is in most people's favorite dairy product, ice cream. And she is also an SQF auditor. So a lot of you may not be familiar with the term SQF, but she audits food facilities, and that's really important in helping those facilities gain access to customers so they can actually sell their product. So she'll be talking a lot about that in a couple weeks. And then last but not least, we have Al Trimchich. Al is also a microbiologist who's been on our team for about a couple of years now. And he also has expertise in milk quality and milk spoilage, all those fun dynamics. So I wanted to cover that we do have a lot of resources. Feel free to reach out to us, and I'll have our contact information at the end of this presentation. You might be asking, what it is that we actually do. So we do a lot of plant visits. We'll consult with folks who are interested in starting processing facilities. And we also put on a lot of workshops for industry, specifically for dairy processing. We do have a certificate program. We put somewhere between 700 and 1,000 people through our program every year who are either new to processing or are already working at dairy processing facilities. So just to give you a quick background, if you're interested in dairy processing, I would highly recommend taking dairy science and sanitation. It's one of those courses that we actually used to have the word basic in front of it. And we got a comment on our evaluation one time that said, I've been in the industry for 20 years and I was upset that I was being sent to a basic course. And I learned a lot. So we ended up rebranding it by taking off the word basic because it's great for people starting out, but it's also a great refresher for people who have been in the industry for a long time. We have different food safety courses, which we'll get into why that's important. We have pasteurizer courses. So for the two main types of pasteurization systems, which would be a HTST, so a plate heat exchanger, and a vat pasteurizer or batch pasteurizer. And then we have specialized courses in different commodities. So cheese, yogurt, fluid milk, ice cream and frozen desserts, and then membrane filtration, evaporation, and drying. So this is, if you were to take these three basic courses and one of our specialty courses, you could earn a basic dairy processing certificate from us. And that certificate, goes with you as a credential. We also have, the same system in an advanced option. So if you go through our basic certificate, you can move on to pursue an advanced certificate with the same format. So there's core courses, and then there's advanced specialized options that you can take also in those commodities. So that just gives you a quick idea of, what it is we do. And then of course, you're welcome to reach out to us at any point. Earlier, when I showed you the picture of our team, I mentioned that Rob runs the food processing and development laboratory. So that's actually a dairy plant on campus. So it's a fully licensed facility, and it has a lot of small scale equipment in it. So the beauty of that is that industry is able to access that and use it for pilot production. And so we have, we're one of the only universities to have a Greek yogurt separator. We're able to make cheese at that plant. So there's a lot of really neat stuff we can do, and it gives folks the opportunity to test their processing knowledge or test their product. So I wanted to share that resource as well. So moving on to kind of a little more of the meat and potatoes on why you're all here today. And Katelyn covered a lot of reasons why you might be interested. Why bother, right? Why would you bother doing the extra work to do value-added dairy processing? There's kind of three categories that we see a lot when we're talking to people who are interested. So one is definitely current market conditions, and that they can definitely change, right? So sometimes the milk price is more favorable than others, and that can impact your decision on whether or not you would want to bother. I think that's a great way to put it. I mean, it sounds it sounds simple, but that's really what it comes down to. And then there's also the concept of the cooperative strain. So if you're a member of a cooperative and you're not quite happy with the amount you're moving or the price you're getting through your cooperative, then that can also impact a decision like that. There's also this concept of next generation, and I should probably broaden this title to include, wanting to add people back, whether it be the next generation or someone who has an off-farm job that wants to be, at the farm full time. So we need to create room for that person to come back. And one of the ways that we can do that and financially support that would be to, expand our business in one way, shape, or form. We don't want to do it on the farm side. So what other options are there? Let's use what we already have. And then there's the passion category. So, I know I can create a really great product. I, make cheese in my kitchen. All my friends love it. This is what I know I can do this. So those are the three reasons we typically hear. So I have a, philosophical question for the audience. And it's should the dairy farmer be the dairy processor? And yes, and it's a yes or no question. So if you would oblige me in typing that into the chat, I'm curious just to hear whether, I know you're all here for this webinar, but I'm curious to hear what your response is. Should the dairy farmer be the dairy processor? Caitlin prompted you in the chat. Thank you, Caitlin. Yes, yes, better quality products. We're getting a lot of yeses. This makes sense because you're here for this seminar. So we have not gotten any no's yet. All right, so we've gotten all yeses, and I think that's fantastic. My answer to this is maybe or maybe not. And the reason I say this is because the dairy processing business is vastly different than the dairy farming business for a variety of reasons. It's a very, very different skill set. And those skills include, I kind of broke it up into 4 categories. I'm sure I could come up with more if you gave me the time, but marketing, process knowledge, understanding regulatory agencies and the food safety requirements, and time. And those 4 categories are going to be really, really important to your success or lack of success if you were to pursue value-added dairy production. So I want to kick things off with marketing. And before I move on, one of the things about marketing is that many farmers haven't really had to do much marketing personally. You know, that's the reason that cooperatives were formed. It was the purpose of the cooperative is for them to market your product for you. So there's been, in some cases, multiple generations of farmers who have, you know, they work very hard. I'm from a dairy farm. I know exactly how it is, but they have not had to market their product. And so there's this whole shift in how you need to be treating that portion of your business. So marketing considerations, the time it takes. I've heard a very common sentiment I hear from farmers who get into value-added dairy is, I wish I knew before how much time I would be spending talking to people and trying to convince them to get, you know, to stock my product. A lot of times we'll hear, you know, when we're having initial conversations with folks, they'll say, well, I talked to the local convenience store, they're super interested in carrying our product. And I'm sure they are, but that's one tiny piece of the puzzle, and that may or may not pan out when you tell them this is the price, this is how much a minimum order would be for me to distribute it to you, et cetera, et cetera. So this concept of the time it takes and who's going to be doing that is really, really important. There's also the know-how and motivation. So, you know, as an audience of primarily farmers, is that what you want to be doing? You know, at the end of the day, is that your desire? You know, because just realizing that that's going to be an important component of your role that you might not have had any experience doing before. Maybe you really like the idea and that's great, but maybe you're listening to me and you're saying, I don't really think I want to talk to people that much. And that's something that you need to be aware of, because maybe it means if you want to pursue that, you need to hire somebody who helps you with marketing. Or maybe you're saying, you know, that really energizes me. That's what I want to be doing. In either case, it's fine, but you need to think about that. And of course, there's this know-how component. And I think that is going to come with a little bit of experience, but also probably a good chunk of the motivation as well. And then there's this logistics component. Customers have requirements, and this is what Kim's going to be really focusing on in a couple weeks when she does her section of the webinar. But food safety is a huge component to marketing your product. We work with a lot of farmstead processors who are trying to, you know, expand their market. And so much of that is, you know, they're flying by the seat of their pants, trying to make sure that they meet the extra food safety requirements that go above and beyond just what you need to open a dairy processing facility legally in New York State. So, you know, you need this additional paperwork that proves that you have XYZ programs in place and that you're, you know, monitoring things. So, you know, retailers want to be supplying their consumers with a safe product. And I'll get into a little bit of an example of why that's become increasingly important to grocery stores in particular. And there's also this component of logistics that's the distribution logistics, which of course, that also takes time. But distribution is something, again, who's going to be doing that? Are you going to have a business where you're not doing any distribution and you're going to have the store and that's your primary sales location? Or, are you going to be trying to sell your product to other locations where consumers are already going? So again, those are all marketing considerations that are all going to be really important. And I can tell that you all are aware of the marketing issue based on our earlier poll. So I think that's a great thing to be aware of because it is such an important component. But those are kind of, what we see when we talk to folks. One of the myths that I would really like to bust is this quote that if you build it, they will come. And very, very rarely is that true. And it's certainly not true for dairy processing, unfortunately, especially when you're creating this local niche product. It's probably going to be a product that costs higher than a product, a mainstream product, comparable product that they would be getting at their regular grocery store trip. So you need to really think about the 4 Ps of marketing. And we won't get super in depth into these, but product, price, place, and promotions are huge. So thinking about who and where your market is. So who's your market and where are they? Are you going to have a seasonal product? Are you, farmers markets can be seasonal. Are you really going to hang your hat on farmers markets if it's a seasonal market? How are you going to handle that? And what are your sales outlets? So like I mentioned before, are you going to be the only sales outlet? Are you going to have an on-farm, maybe you add it onto an agritourism situation, or maybe, your farm store is the destination in and of itself. Again, who is doing the marketing? And it takes time. I can't stress these last 2 enough. To get just a little bit into the 4 Ps, just to get everyone's wheels turning, as far as the product goes, figuring out what exactly your product is and what need does it fill for consumers. So a lot of people, really like to focus on the fact that, hey, I'm local, which I think is great. But we also need to think about the fact of, all right, well, if you're local, how local of an audience are you wanting to serve? And can your local audience, depending on what radius you're thinking about geographically, support you enough and buying enough product to make this viable? So thinking about what your product is, the value proposition of that product is going to be really important. We also have price. So one thing that people don't necessarily think about, and this is really important from a just overall business planning standpoint and getting your ducks in a row, how much do you want to buy your own milk for? And I don't think people often think of it like this, but if you're typically, you need to check with your cooperative. If you're a member of a cooperative, one of the first things I would do is get with them and check what their rules are for you utilizing your own milk to make a value-added product. Because chances are they've contracted to purchase all of your milk. So sometimes the cooperative will strike a deal with you where you will be buying that milk back, out of your bulk tank, and you'll be using that. So thinking about this concept is important. The other important piece of that, and I'll just touch on this now really quickly, is, and it doesn't really have to do with price, but it's, will the cooperative allow you to make the product that you want to make? So if your cooperative, for example, is making cheese and you want to make cheese as well, will the cooperative allow you to do that because you might be competing with their cheese? And that's going to be specific based on the scenario, but something you definitely need to think about when you're business planning. So price is important. How much do you want to buy your milk for if you have to buy it back from your cooperative? And based on your cost of production or what you have to buy that milk for, what will your theoretical yield be when you're making whatever value added product you choose? And what are your costs? What's your margin going to be? What are you going to price that product at? And how much does that price affect how many people are going to be willing to buy that. And I'll just mention that what people say they're willing to pay and what they're truly willing to buy can be two different things. So you have to be very, very careful with how you think about that. People really like to think that they're going to make really good cheese and people are totally going to be willing to buy it for, $25, $30 a pound. And that's not always true. Place. Again, this has a lot to do with marketing in the sense of distribution and logistics and figuring out what works for you. Obviously, the more places you can get it, the more product exposure you have, the more likely you are to have sales, but at the same time, transportation costs time and money. And then promotion. So how are you promoting your product to your customers, whether they be directly to the consumer or other businesses? So thinking about that promotion piece and what makes sense to you, and not relying on the if we build it, they will come scenario for promotion. So again, we hear it all the time. I wish I knew how much time I'd spent doing this part. Logistics. So kind of going off of that same concept, don't underestimate the amount of time it's going to take you to get your product from point A to point B. I have a plant that I work really closely with, and they're relatively new farmstead processor, and they're saying, we don't have a ton of population directly around us, and that we knew going into this that we would have to work on distributing our product a little bit farther out. But I'm, distributing my product to customers, and I'm actually losing money on certain routes because customers aren't buying enough for me to pay for how much it costs to get the product there. But at the same time, from a long-term standpoint, I don't want to shut off that pipeline of, potential business. And also I have a couple customers who they have multiple convenience store chains and they need me to deliver both. So is it worth it? And I think people really underestimate the time that takes from both a labor standpoint and just a cost standpoint as well. Determine what volume you need to move through potential customers to make it worth the trip, essentially. And does your long-term vision justify a short-term or midterm loss in that case? I like to show this map just because it illustrates where is your market. And it's not to say, we're looking at the Adirondacks here. It's not to say that it's impossible for a business to be viable in these areas that are more around, our less residents per square mile area. So our less dense population centers. But it does mean we need to think strategically and realistically about where those people are. So you'll notice here, of course, we have New York City, Long Island, very high population density. And of course, when we look at our I-90 corridor, we're fairly dense around here. But I like to show this just to make sure that people are really thinking about the fact of where am I actually in relation to the rest of the state? People like to say, well, we're in New York City, we're in the Northeast, we're a great hub for population. And that's true, but it doesn't mean that, if you're in Western New York, you're a good 6 hours away from New York City. So it's relatively close compared to other areas of the country or, other areas of the Northeast, but, just thinking realistically about where your population center is and planning appropriately. So the next category I had, kind of moving out of marketing, which is a big subject in and of itself, is processing knowledge. So there are two really important things when it comes to processing knowledge. One is quality and one is safety, right? So does it taste good? That's really important. And one of my big recommendations is, everyone likes to start out, and this is what I would do too if I didn't have any processing equipment, right? I would test something out in my kitchen, at least see, relatively speaking, how it works to make a product. But when you serve it to people, don't just ask your close friends, hey, do you like what I made? Because your friends are going to say, yeah, it's really great. So, it's fair to do some decent market research. And getting recipes right takes effort and knowledge. So, that's where you're welcome to reach out to us. We have expertise on dairy foods processing. So please feel free to reach out to us, when you get started up and try to figure out what your product is, and we can help you with figuring out what the right thing to do is. But this doesn't taste good. It's going to be important specifically to consumers, because that's the main reference they have to whether or not they're even going to want to buy your product. And then the second portion is it safe? And I mentioned that this is becoming increasingly important. So there is an increasing amount of regulatory pressure around the areas of food safety. So one concept is you need it to open your doors, but you also need it to keep your doors open. So it also is becoming a major customer requirement, specifically for wholesale products, but most unfortunately, it's a customer requirement for your retail customers as well, because if you did have a food safety issue, we've seen businesses close their doors because of food safety issues and food recalls that were a result of an unsafe product that they produced. And no one gets in the business to make people sick, but it does happen if you don't have the knowledge around how to produce safe food. So this is becoming very, very important. So recommendations overall, get training as far as processing knowledge goes. Get training before you break ground, and please reach out to us and reach out to your state regulatory agency, which would be Ag and Markets, before you start breaking ground on building a building. I can't tell you how many times that hasn't happened, and things either get planned very poorly, and when we go in, we're thinking we really wish they would have just changed the layout, not even the square footage, just the layout of this facility, or the state will come in to inspect the facility and they say, well, you got to add a drain here. So they have to tear up concrete to do that. And that's not what you want to happen. So before you break ground, before you get your hands dirty in that respect, reach out to us, get training, and understand those regulatory requirements, which we can help connect you with the appropriate people, but make sure that you start the process there. We're very fortunate in New York State to have a really good New York State division of milk control, who would be a plant inspector for a value-added dairy business, a dairy processing plant, and they're very knowledgeable, and they'll work with you to help get you running. And then I'd recommend testing out your recipes at a processing facility before building a plant. So this one, there's situations where you could, utilize Cornell's resource. There's also sometimes relatively local processors at a smaller scale who can, have the equipment necessary, where you might be able to form an agreement with them to run your prospective product with their equipment in a fully licensed facility, so that you're able to get a feel for what that scale of production would be like, and you'd have the chance to iron out some kinks before starting. So getting into food safety just a little bit. Question in the chat. Well, I guess I won't do this because it kind of has the answer on the slide, but the question I would ask you just to think about in your heads, and given some major recent events in the news, you might have something top of mind, but do you see more food recalls in the news? So think in your head, yeah, compared to, when I was a kid or when I was a teenager, I see a lot more food safety recalls, actually, now that you mention it. And that's true. There are more food recalls in the news, but it's not necessarily because food is getting less safe, but from a public health standpoint, we're getting much better than tracking down where outbreaks originate. So in order for us to consider something a food safety outbreak, we really only need 2 related cases for something to be considered an outbreak. So, and our technology is just getting so much better. So food companies of all sizes, even very, very small processors, need to be on top of food safety issues, because you're equally likely to get caught if you do have an issue. So, no one gets in this business to produce a product that's going to make people sick. That's not anyone's motivation, but it can happen, and people need to be aware of that from a risk management standpoint. So stakeholders in this would be, your state and federal regulatory officials, your customers, and of course your consumers. Just a quick, I know we're running short on time, so just a quick overview of why that is. We have gotten really good at our DNA fingerprinting technology. So we're able to actually utilize, if someone goes to the hospital and they're sick, and they take a sample and we determine that, all right, this person has Listeria monocytogenes, which is a pathogen that is not good. It's known to be associated with dairy products. It kills about 20% of people it affects, which are not good odds. So we take it very seriously in dairy. So if clinical cases are identified, the CDC uploads those fingerprints of that particular strain to a database. If you have an inspection by the FDA, for example, and they go in and they're taking swabs of just the environment of your facility, and they find a matching strain, that will also get uploaded to the database. So we have really great detection tools that can help link outbreaks together. And that's something that, again, from a risk management standpoint, you need to be aware of that before you build a plant and before you start selling food to customers. One of my last but not least important topics is this time concept. So within each one of the other categories, so marketing, logistics and distribution, et cetera, I mentioned time in all of them, and bringing it all together. Dairy processing is not a part-time job, so please don't plan it as if it is. So all of these details take time, and from a food safety standpoint, I can tell you right now, you don't want your herdsmen walking back and forth between the barn and the plant. Maybe on separate days, go home, shower, change their clothes, come back. That's more feasible from a food safety standpoint. But when you look at Listeria cases like we have on our team, you want dedicated personnel in the dairy plant versus the dairy farm. So other business considerations, I mentioned cooperative requirements. Is co-packing an option for temporary startup? So testing your product by making it at someone else's facility before you start building your own plant, to see if you have a good market and a good product that people want to buy. It might cost you more money in the short run to make it this way as far as cost of individual units go, but it gives you a chance to dip your toe into the water with maybe less capital investment. Build a plant, not just a processing room. So if you're looking at buying an individual structure, or if you're looking at modifying a certain room that you have on your farm, you need to think of this business as not just a one-room show, but as a plant that has room for a place where you can have an entryway, so you can get hygienically, hygienic attire. So change your shoes, wear a lab coat or change your outfit. Where are you going to store your product? Where are you going to store your packaging? All of those things. And we'll be talking a lot more about that next week. And so more information is coming soon there. So I want to just wrap up really quickly by talking about some things that to include in your budget. Don't forget about proper cleaning chemicals, and don't forget the type of product you make impacts your facility design. We'll also be talking more about that next week. And some products may require regulatory consideration if you have a very, very unique idea. So build that relationship with your regulatory officials, and we can help you do that. So I'm going to leave this slide up here because it has the dates of the next session on it, but I didn't know if we wanted to use, I know we have like 1 minute left, so I didn't know if there were any questions that Katelyn you'd like me to address.
Yeah, so it does look like we have a few questions that came in the chat. I think the first one, Anika, that we'd love to hear your perspective on is, will processing and selling from my farm open me up to activist pressure? So in your experience, have you found that farms that are selling direct to consumers get more pressure from the public, particularly activists?
I really haven't found that, and it's an interesting question, but I think that activists will seek wherever they find an opportunity, and I don't think that they necessarily find an opportunity more so at value-added operations than they would anywhere else. So my answer to that is no. And when I think about the cases, at least that I'm aware of course, there are some that did happen at value-added companies, I'll say, but not necessarily exclusively. And there are honestly so many, unfortunately, so many cases that I wouldn't say that it would open you up to more risk just because of your value-added venture.
Anika, I have a question for you that I was curious when you were talking. You were touching base a little bit about how you should set up your marketing when you are like looking in your region, and maybe you are not in a very populated region, but you still have like marketing. Is there any tips that you could give to folks that are thinking about doing that, on how they have like a practical way to access if they have a market, besides being so like in a practical way, not so much like a subjective way?
Yeah, so I think the first thing depends on what you want to make, because that opens, that would open specific doors to who you'd be marketing your product to. But the other thing that I'd really recommend people do is to reach out to their local either IDA or economic development agency, because a lot of times they have a lot of county level resources or regional resources that can give you a lot of information about your region and things like that. The other thing I'd recommend, if you're not in a populated area, is figure out where, do you want to be in the wholesale business or do you want to be in the retail business? So is there an opportunity for you to work with a distributor, and is that, feasible as part of your business plan to get to move your product a little farther out of the region? Or, how is the best way to handle that, and what opportunity can I create for myself?
Okay. And yeah, inside the same line, we have a question here asking if, do I call ag and markets from the very beginning or after I have a startup plan?
I would reach out to ag and markets sooner rather than later. So I would definitely say that if you kind of know that you definitely want to do this and you have at least one product in mind that you're definitely going to make, it's not a bad idea to get a hold of them and start that conversation sooner rather than later. The licensing process does not happen overnight, and you're going to need to go back and forth with them on, this is what my plan is this acceptable to you? And they'll say, no, it isn't, or yes, it is, or yes, it is, but you need to fix X, Y, Z. So, in general, they are very good at working with folks. Their job is to protect the public health, so their job isn't to get in your way, but to make sure that you're doing things in a safe manner. So the best way to do that, and I think we'll have a slide on next week's presentation about how you can find it, but on New York State Ag and Markets website, if you go to the Division of Milk Control page, they actually have a contact map where you can see your inspector for the region, and you're also welcome to reach out directly to me, and I can help you figure out who that person is.
Awesome. Yes. Yeah, it gets us to the next question that is like related as well. There's like, how do you choose the best product for you to make? That's a good one.
I wish I had the answer. So it's really going to depend. Again, I think it depends on what do you even have the desire to make. Certain products can be more finicky than others. So, I wouldn't recommend, cottage cheese is one that's tricky to make. So I wouldn't necessarily say, yeah, that's a great first product to try. However, if that's the product that you've identified as having the greatest market demand in your area, and you think from a marketing perspective that can work, then, we could work with you and figure out how to make cottage cheese, but, not all products are created equal in that sense. So I would answer that it's a combination of what you want to make, and then also really what you're able to sell is what it comes down to. So those two categories are how I'd make the decision. I don't have clear-cut answers for anyone on that one.
Yeah, no, I know it's a lot of like variables, and of course it depends on a lot of things. Yes. And we also have a question here on the Q&A, and I think that's probably for Katelyn. Should I set up two business, one for the farm and one for the value add?
Yeah, I would add one thing to Anika's comment too, that a great way to figure out which product is budgets as well. So like put together an enterprise budget for what would it look like if I did milk fluid sales or if I did ice cream, and look at it from a financial perspective too. Because if it's going to be a lot of work and it's going to be tough to do and you don't have interest in it, then like the profit margin has to be really high in order to justify it. Yeah, so from like a business structure point of view, I would definitely encourage you to reach out to your tax preparer and or your accountant. There's some different tax implications that come into, having two separate businesses where the production farm sells its product to the processing farm. But there's also some perks with being able to manage it and separately that way. There's also some different things too when you consider about like risk management and liability and who carries that liability. Separating them can sometimes protect the production side a little bit better in the worst case scenario that you had an issue. And it also, I see it happen too when we're thinking about bringing on the next generation. So the senior generation might continue to own, manage, and operate the production farm, but the younger generation might own and manage that processing piece. But then we also have cases where those are all mixed together and it's all one business structure. So it really depends on your personal situation, and kind of like what your financials look like and what your situation is, but benefits to both options.
Okay. And I think that's the questions we have on the box. If anyone else has any questions, please feel free to drop it in the chat. And if you don't have any questions, we are gonna send you your way the survey so you can evaluate and help us improve for the next sessions. And as Anika said before, please join us next Wednesday for the next session that we are going to talk about other aspects of that. And please feel free to reach out if you have any questions after the webinar, and we are going to make sure to answer that as well.
And I have also put my email in the chat. And I hope everyone tunes in next week for more information.
Oh, Robert, you've got your hand up. Go ahead.
I wonder if he meant to raise his hand or not.
No, I didn't. I think I just clicked on something.
Yeah.
I wanted to raise my hand and say, good job. That's what I wanted to do.
Thanks, Rob.
You're welcome.
So yeah, so thank you everyone that joined us today, and hope to see you all next week.
Thank you.
Great.
Have a
Thank
good
you all
night.
for attending.